down the saturation of the world. The sky was a flat sheet of pale gray, the kind of color that seems to muffle sound and weigh on the shoulders. The air was still, unnervingly still. No wind, no birdsong, just the low, mechanical hum of the city. It was September 12, 2008, but the afternoon could have belonged to no particular time at all. Suspended somewhere between light and shadow, Charles Peck woke early that morning. He was a man of quiet habits, someone who rarely rushed, who believed in being present in every small routine. He made coffee, black with just a single spoon of sugar. He stood by the kitchen window while the kettle hissed, staring out into a street that seemed half asleep. He thought about work, the radio station, the colleagues who'd probably be talking about weekend plans already. And then, as always, his thoughts slid toward her. His fiancée's name sat warmly in his mind like a candle. She was the reason he was boarding the train that day, heading to Ventura. They had been engaged for only a few months, but the wedding plans were already spinning in full force. He was excited, yes, but also a little nervous. Nervous in the way only someone deeply in love can be. Afraid of the magnitude of what they were building together, he buttoned his shirt slowly, carefully, as though the ritual itself demanded reverence. Before leaving, he looked once more around his small apartment, the life he had built for himself, the books neatly stacked by the couch, the faint smell of coffee still curling in the air, and he smiled. In just a few more weeks, he would not be coming home to this space alone. The train station was busy, the way it always was on Fridays. Business suits, backpacks, the smell of hot pretzels from a nearby kiosk. There was something comforting about the rhythm of transit. Trains arriving, people stepping off, people stepping on, life moving in and out like breath. Charles waited with his hands in his pockets, looking down the track as the Metrolink train approached. Its silver body reflected the dull sky, a streak of motion in the distance. When the doors slid open, he stepped aboard. He found a seat in one of the rear cars, settling in by the window. The seat was warm from whoever had been there before him, and as he sat back, he let out a small, contented sigh. Outside, the suburbs rolled by in soft blurs, golden hills dotted with houses, telephone poles ticking by in steady intervals. The train rocked gently, almost like a lullaby. People around him were quiet. Some scrolled through their phones, some read paperbacks, some simply stared ahead, lost in private thoughts. Charles smiled faintly. There was something intimate about train rides, the way strangers shared space, lives brushing against one another for a brief moment before diverging again. As the minutes passed, Charles allowed himself to imagine the evening ahead. He pictured stepping off the train, seeing her face at the station, that quick, bright smile that always made him feel 20 years younger. They would probably go somewhere to eat, maybe laugh over how chaotic wedding planning had been, talk about colors and seating arrangements, about honeymoon destinations, about the little house they'd been eyeing on a quiet street. Somewhere outside, the light began to shift. Afternoon thinned toward evening, and the sky darkened in a way that felt unnatural, too fast. Charles noticed it, a prickle under his skin, the sense that something was about to happen. He shook the thought away. Trains were safe. He had taken this route dozens of times. At 4:22 p.m., everything shattered. The crash was not a single sound, but a sequence of them, layered and overlapping in a violent crescendo. There was first a screech, metal grinding against metal, the brakes slamming down, then a deafening, bone-shaking impact. The world lurched forward. Charles was thrown from his seat, the window shattering beside him, glass spraying like shards of ice. It all seemed to happen in slow motion. The car twisted, folding in on itself. Screams erupted, high and panicked, but were quickly drowned by the tearing roar of steel and the groan of collapsing metal. The air filled with dust and smoke. Charles felt the world spin, a flash of pain, and then nothing. Later, officials would say that death came to him instantly, that he never had time to feel fear. But if that were true, then what came after should not have been possible. Hours later, as first responders climbed over the wreckage, cutting through metal, pulling survivors out, a phone rang miles away, in a small house where a television blared breaking news about the Metrolink disaster. Charles's family froze. His niece was the first to see the screen light up. The name there, glowing softly in the dim room, nearly knocked the air out of her chest. Charles Peck. Her hands trembled as she answered. "Uncle Charles, are you there? Can you hear me?" The silence that followed was too thick, too absolute. For a moment, she thought the call had dropped. Then she heard it faint, almost like wind, moving through a pipe, a hiss, and then the line went dead. She tried calling back immediately. Voicemail. Not long after, Charles' fiancée's phone rang. This time, she was the one who nearly dropped to her knees when she saw his name. Charles. Oh my God, Charles. Please, say something. There was breathing on the line. Shallow, uneven. It sounded like someone in pain, like someone fighting to speak. She begged him to hold on, told him rescue was coming, promised they would find him, and then the line cut again, and again, and again. 30-5 calls in total, each one a cruel thread of hope, pulling them in, making them believe he might still be down there, alive, waiting for help. The police were notified. Search crews were told to focus on his section of the train. Each ring of the phone felt urgent, like a message being sent from the edge of life itself. But as night fell, the calls began to feel different. There was still breathing, but sometimes there were other sounds, scraping, faint metallic knocks, and once, a whisper so soft it seemed to slip between worlds. His fiancée thought she heard her name. His brother swore he heard 3 knocks, deliberate, like someone signaling from a dark, hidden place. The living room where they all sat grew heavy, the air charged with something no one could name. Every ring of the phone felt like it was coming from somewhere beyond. Just before midnight, the rescue team found him. He had been gone since 4:22 p.m., pinned, motionless, unable to have made a single call. And yet, just as the news reached the family, the phone rang one last time. No one wanted to answer. The silence stretched, unbearable. Finally, with tears streaming down her face, his fiancée picked up. This time, there were no words, no breathing, just a long, hollow exhale, and then nothing. The house where Charles's family gathered felt as though it had sunk into the earth by a few inches, dragged down by invisible hands. The air was stale, heavy. The television was off now, the news no longer needed. The story had played out. The world had already moved on to the next tragedy, but they could not move on. They sat together, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent. Cups of coffee went cold on the table. No one really ate. The phones lay in the center of the room, like small black mirrors reflecting nothing back. And yet, every so often, someone's hand would twitch toward one, as though expecting it to light up. Again, because none of them could shake the feeling that something was unfinished. The calls from the night before had been frantic, desperate, 35 in total. It was impossible, they were told by investigators. The phone was damaged beyond repair, they said. The cell towers could not explain the pattern. They said there were theories about delayed signals, but how do you delay breathing? How do you delay knocks, whispers, human presence? His fiancée didn't sleep that first night. She lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying every sound she had heard through the receiver. Was it breathing? Or was it just the wind? Did he whisper her name? Or had her mind invented it out of grief? At some point near dawn, she must have drifted into a shallow, uneasy sleep, and she dreamed on the dream. She was standing on the train tracks, barefoot. The sky above was that same strange, colorless gray from the day of the crash. The rails stretched in both directions, vanishing into mist. Somewhere ahead, she heard a ringing. Not a normal phone ring, but a slow, metallic chime, echoing over the empty landscape. She began to walk, following the sound. With every step, the ringing grew louder. Then, out of the fog, she saw the train. It was completely still, as if frozen in time. The cars twisted and broken just as they had been shown on the news. And inside one of the cars, through a shattered window, she saw Charles. He was sitting upright, perfectly still, his head turned toward her. His lips moved, but she could not hear what he was saying. She pressed her hands against the glass, trying to reach him, and then, faintly, she heard it. 3 knocks. From inside the car, she woke with a gasp, the sound still echoing in her skull. And then she realized it wasn't only in her head. From somewhere in the house came the sound of 3 sharp knocks. Knock. She sat up, heart pounding, scanning the room. It was nearly dawn, the sky outside just beginning to pale, and the house was silent. No one else stirred. The knocks did not repeat by morning. She had convinced herself it was nothing, a dream bleeding into waking life. The house settling, pipes contracting, anything. But the phones remained in the center of the table, and all of them still found themselves glancing at them, waiting. The first call came 2 nights later. His fiancée was the one who answered. Charles. she said, breathless. At first, there was only static. Then, slowly, like something rising out of deep water, came the sound of breathing. And then, impossibly, a voice, soft, broken, like a tape recorder losing power. Didn't get to say goodbye. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor, clutching the phone to her ear. Charles, where are you? What do you want us to do? But there was nothing else, just the sound of someone exhaling. And then the line went dead. When she told the others, they believed her without question. They had heard the calls, they had heard the breathing. There was no reason to think this was anything else but the voice. That was new. It changed everything. In the following days, the calls came at random intervals, never more than one per night, as if someone was making sure they never truly slept. And it wasn't just the calls. Sometimes they would hear faint ringing when no phones were on. The sound would drift through the hallway, soft and hollow, vanishing when they tried to track it down. Objects began to move. A picture frame of Charles and his fiancée was found face down one morning, though no one had touched it. The kitchen light flickered without cause. Once, late at night, the family dog stood at the doorway to the living room, growling at nothing, hackles raised. One evening, Charles's brother was alone in the house when a phone rang. Not his phone, not even a working phone. It was Charles's old cell phone, the one that had been recovered from the wreck. It had no SIM card, no battery, and yet it rang, a single, high, shrill note that cut off as soon as he reached for it. He didn't sleep that night either. Word of the haunting began to spread. Friends and extended family came by, half out of support, half out of morbid curiosity. Some left quickly, pale-faced, muttering that the house felt wrong, heavy. One visitor claimed she heard someone whisper her name while standing in the kitchen. The family sought answers. A local priest blessed the house, walking through each room with holy water. For a few days, the air felt lighter, the nights calmer. But then, on the fourth night, the phone rang again. This time, everyone heard it at once. And this time, there was no breathing, only 3 sharp knocks. 1, 2, 3. Slow, deliberate. The edges soften, the rawness fades. You begin to move forward, but in Charles's house, grief had taken root. It had grown teeth. The calls came every few days now, but they were changing. The first ones had been filled with static, breathing, and that single broken sentence, I didn't get to say goodbye. But lately, the voice, if it could still be called a voice, had grown distorted. Sometimes it was too loud, blowing out the speakers with a burst of sound that made everyone flinch. Sometimes it was so faint that they had to put the phone on speaker and crowd around it, holding their breath, trying to make out the words. And sometimes it wasn't Charles's voice at all. His fiancée was the first to notice. She knew every inflection of his speech, every soft cadence. But one night, when the call came, she froze before answering, because she swore the ring sounded different, lower somehow, like it was coming from deeper underground. When she picked up, there was silence at first, then a whisper, not Charles's whisper, a woman's "I can't see, I can't." The line cut before the sentence finished. The phone slid out of her hand and clattered to the floor. No one slept that night by now. The family had started writing everything down, every call, every sound, every dream. The notebook sat open on the kitchen table, filled with shaky handwriting. They were building a record, a timeline of the haunting, and the dreams were getting worse. Charles's brother dreamed of sitting in the wreckage of the train, surrounded by broken bodies. In the dream, his phone rang, and when he answered, it wasn't Charles at all, but dozens of overlapping voices, all whispering at once, "We're still here." His niece dreamed of standing at the train station, watching the Metrolink approach, except this time, it never stopped. It just kept coming, slow and endless. And through every window she saw the faces of the dead, staring out at her, eyes wide, mouths open in silent screams. When she awoke, she heard the faint sound of a train horn outside, though the tracks were miles away. By the third week, the family realized they could no longer handle it alone. They reached out to a paranormal research group, a pair of investigators who had worked on hauntings before. The team arrived with equipment, EMF readers, digital recorders, cameras. On the first night, nothing happened. The house was quiet, almost too quiet, as though whatever was there had retreated. The team set up microphones, left recorders running through the night, and waited. At 3:15 a.m., a phone rang. Everyone jolted awake. The lead investigator grabbed the recorder, started filming. This time, when the fiancé answered, The voice was unmistakable. "Help me." It was Charles's voice, but it sounded wrong, stretched, as though coming from far away. "Where are you?" she whispered. There was no reply, just 3 knocks. The investigators captured everything: the ring, the knocks, the breathing. When they played back the recording later, they found something none of them had heard in real time: a second voice, buried beneath the sound, a voice whispering a single word: "Stay." That was the first time anyone felt fear strong enough to make them consider leaving the house, but they didn't. They couldn't, because now it was no longer about closure. It was about answers. The investigators stayed another night. This time, they set up a spirit box, a device that rapidly scans radio frequencies, allowing voices to break through in real time. At first, there was only static. Then, through the noise, came a single, clear word: Ventura. Charles had been on his way to Ventura that day. Then another word back. The fiancé's eyes filled with tears. "Charles, is that you? Are you back? What do you want?" The box crackled, hissed. And then, softly, "Not alone." The room went still. No one spoke. One of the investigators reached for the power switch, but before he could shut the device off, a different voice came through, deeper, harsher: "Leave." The box went dead. So did every light in the house for a few seconds. There was nothing but darkness, breathing, and the faint hum of distant power lines. Then, from somewhere in the house, a phone rang. Slow. Single chime. Everyone froze. When the lights flickered back on, the phones on the table were glowing. All of them, even the dead one, place where the line between the living and the dead was wearing thin. After the night when every phone glowed at once, nothing felt normal again. Charles's fiancée kept the phones unplugged, turned off, buried in drawers, but they would still light up. Sometimes at 3 in the morning, sometimes just as she was about to fall asleep. The investigators stayed for another week. They documented everything: temperature drops that swept through rooms like invisible tides, the sudden smell of burning metal, and the feeling, that unmistakable feeling of being watched. One night, while reviewing audio captured near the kitchen, they heard something chilling. It was Charles's voice. Yes, but he wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to someone else. "Not yet," he said. And then, faintly, another voice replied, something guttural, low. Almost amused. "You can't stop me." The fiancée broke down when she heard it. It was no longer just grief. It was fear, the kind that sets into the bones. That tells you something is fundamentally wrong. The next day, they drove out to the crash site. It had been cleared, mostly the tracks repaired, the debris gone, but there was still something in the air there, a charge that prickled against the skin. The sound of passing trains seemed too loud, too close. One of the investigators set up an EVP recorder by the tracks. They stood in silence, waiting, the only sound the distant rumble of another train somewhere down the line. And then, through the static of the recorder, a voice came, clear as day: "Help us." Not "help me." "Help us." The hair on the back of their necks rose. When they played the recording back in the car, they heard something else under the words, a strange metallic ringing, like dozens of phones all going off at once. That night, back at the house, things escalated. It started with footsteps in the hallway, heavy and deliberate, though no one was there. Then the lights began to flicker, not randomly, but in patterns, almost like Morse code. One of the investigators tried to record it, and on camera, a shadow appeared for just a split second, a tall, human-shaped figure standing in the corner of the room, gone before anyone could turn their head. The fiancé refused to sleep in the house. After that, they moved into a hotel, thinking maybe distance would break the pattern, but the phones followed. One night, she woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. The screen was black. Then, without warning, it lit up, not with Charles's name this time, but with a single word: "No chance." At first, there was nothing, then dozens of voices, overlapping, whispering, crying, screaming. The sound was unbearable, like being in the middle of a crowd where everyone was calling out at once. And then, cutting through it all, Charles's voice: "Don't listen to them." And then, another voice, deeper, closer: "She already has." The line went dead. She dropped the phone. For a long time, she just sat there, staring at it, afraid to touch it again. When the investigators analyzed the call log the next day, they found something impossible. The call had come from Charles's own number, but his phone was still locked in a police evidence locker. The lead investigator wanted to quit after that. He told the family that whatever this was, it had grown beyond the scope of simple contact from the dead. "This isn't just Charles," he said quietly. "This is something bigger, something older, something that knows how to use him to reach you." But the family refused to stop. They needed answers. They needed to know why the calls hadn't ended, why the haunting kept pulling them back to the moment of the crash. That night, the fiancé had another dream. This one was worse. She was back on the tracks, but this time there was no train, just endless rails stretching into blackness. And out of the dark came figures, dozens of them, some with torn clothing, some with faces she couldn't quite see, all of them moving toward her in silence. She tried to run, but the tracks beneath her feet turned to water, dragging her down as she sank. She heard the sound of a phone ringing. When she woke, she was crying, and the phone was ringing in real life. She answered, shaking on the other end. There was no breathing this time, just a single word. Soon, the traditional sense. No shouted warning, no demand, just a quiet certainty that whatever was coming could not be stopped. She began to lose sleep. The others noticed, the investigators noticed, but no one knew how to comfort her, because they all felt it too. That creeping sense of inevitability, as though the house itself were waiting. The phones kept ringing. Sometimes they would pick up and hear nothing. Sometimes they would hear only static. And sometimes, just sometimes, they would hear voices that didn't sound like Charles at all. One night, the fiancé's brother answered a call. At first it was just breathing. Then, very softly, "We're still there." He froze. "Who is this?" he asked. A pause. Everyone. The line went dead. He didn't sleep that night either. The investigators decided to try one last session. This time, not in the house, but at the crash site itself. After dark, it was illegal to be there, technically, but they didn't care. They needed to know. The air was cold, unnaturally so. Their breath came out in pale clouds, though it wasn't nearly cold enough for frost. They set up cameras, audio recorders, EMF meters, and then they waited. For the first half hour, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped another 10 degrees in less than a minute. The EMF meter spiked. One of the cameras flickered and went black, and then they heard it faint at first, then louder, the sound of ringing, not one phone, dozens, hundreds. It seemed to come from the ground itself, like the earth was full of cell phones all vibrating at once. The lead investigator called out, "Charles, if you can hear us, if this is you, give us a sign." For a moment, silence. Then, across the tracks, a figure appeared, tall, still, watching. The investigator's flashlight beam caught it. A man in torn clothing, face pale, eyes dark, and then he was gone. But in the distance, they heard another voice. This time, all of them heard it. "Go." It was not a plea, it was a command. They ran back at the hotel. The fiancée listened to the audio they captured. Her hands shook. The ringing was there, yes, but there was something under it. Dozens of voices, hundreds, crying out, overlapping, some begging, some screaming, some calling for help. And under all of that, one word, repeated over and over in a tone that sounded less like Charles and more like something wearing his voice like a mask. "Stay." She shut off the recorder, but even in the silence, she could still hear it, faintly, as though it had embedded itself in her mind. The next day, the fiancée told the investigators she was done. "I can't do this anymore," she said, voice raw. "If he's still out there, I can't reach him. Whatever's calling me, it isn't just him. I don't know what it is, but it wants us here, all of us, and I'm not going back." But that night, the phone rang again. She let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then she picked it up. Charles's voice came through, clearer than ever. "Don't hang up." She froze. He sounded scared. "They're not me," he said quickly. "You have to stop answering. Every time you do, it lets them closer." And then a sound behind his voice, a deep, resonant growl, followed by a single word, spoken in perfect unison by dozens of voices. Closer. The line went dead. She didn't sleep at all after that. When morning came, she packed her things and left the hotel. The investigators offered to escort her out of town, but she refused. "If this follows me," she said, "I'll know. But if it stays here, then at least it ends with me leaving." The family was divided. Some wanted to stay and finish the investigation. Others were ready to go. In the end, only the lead investigator remained. He returned to the crash site one final time, Just before dawn, the sky was turning pale, the first light cutting across the rails. He stood there, alone, waiting, and as the sun rose, his phone rang. He didn't answer it. He just let it ring, again and again, until it stopped. When he looked down at the call log later, there was no record of any call ever coming through. The family eventually left. California. The phone stopped ringing. For a while, months passed. Life tried to go back to normal, but one night, just before the anniversary of the crash, the fiancée woke in her new apartment to the sound of her phone buzzing on the nightstand. The screen was dark. She turned it over, and for a brief second, she saw his name, and she swore she heard him whisper, not through the phone, but right there in the room, "It's not over." Staring at the ceiling, phone clutched to her chest. Feeling her pulse hammer against the glass screen, the buzzing stopped. The apartment went completely silent. No hum of the refrigerator, no distant traffic, just silence so deep that she could hear her own heartbeat. And then, very faintly, from somewhere inside the apartment, came the sound of another phone ringing. But she didn't own a landline. She got up slowly, barefoot on the cold floor. The sound seemed to come from the kitchen. She followed it, breath shallow, heart in her throat. The ringing stopped just as she stepped inside. She stood there, frozen, staring at the counter, her phone lit up in her hand. Unknown caller, and then it rang again. This time she answered. Hello, static. Then, not one voice, but many hundreds layered over one another, rising and falling like a chorus from a cathedral buried underground, some crying, some whispering, some screaming, and then, cutting through them all, Charles's voice. Listen to me. Her knees went weak. Charles, you have to end it, he said. You have to stop them. Stop who? She whispered. They're not supposed to be here, he said, voice breaking. None of us are. We keep calling because we're stuck. They won't let us go. Every time you pick up, it pulls us closer to the living. But we're not alone down here. A long pause, then a sound, low and guttural, like metal tearing. They're coming, Charles said. Hang up before the line exploded with noise, screaming, crashing, voices shouting words she couldn't understand, and then silence. She threw the phone across the kitchen. The next morning, she called the lead investigator. We're finishing this, she said. Tonight, he didn't argue. He'd been having the same dreams. They met at the crash site again, just after sunset. The place felt wrong in a way that went beyond simple. Tragedy. The air tasted metallic. Their breaths steamed in the warm night air, and from the moment they arrived, they could hear it faint, far away, the ringing of a single phone. Somewhere in the distance, the investigator placed a digital recorder on the ground, switched it on, and said clearly, Charles Peck, if you can hear me, this is your chance. We're listening. Tell us what you want. The ringing stopped, and then silence. So deep, so absolute. It made the world feel hollow. Then the recorder captured something, a voice, not loud, not clear, but unmistakable. We're still here. And then the world seemed to fracture, every phone they had. The investigator S, the fiancé S, the backup burners they'd brought, began to ring at once. The sound was deafening. The fiancé grabbed one at random and answered. Charles's voice screamed through the speaker, run, and then, behind his voice, footsteps. Heavy, close, coming toward them from all directions at once. They didn't run, not this time. Instead, they stayed, and as they stayed, the air around them thickened until it felt like they were breathing underwater. Shadows gathered at the edge of the wreckage. Figures began to take shape. Dozens, maybe hundreds, pale faces staring from the darkness, eyes hollow but fixed on them. And then, from somewhere deep in the shadows, a single voice spoke. Answer. One of the phones lit up. The fiancée stepped forward. Her hands were steady. She answered. What happened next is still debated by those who were there. Some say they saw her collapse. Others say she didn't fall, that she was pulled down into the ground, as if the earth swallowed her whole. The investigator swears she simply vanished 1 second there. The next gone, leaving only the faint glow of her phone screen lying in the dirt. It was still connected to the call. He picked it up with shaking hands. Hello, static. And then a whisper that sounded nothing like Charles. You're next. He dropped the phone and ran. He never returned to the site. Within weeks, he left the state entirely, but he kept the phone. And sometimes, late at night, it still rings. He never answers, but he always listens. And every time, just before the ringing stops. He swears he hears someone breathing on the other end. The fiancée was never found. No trace. No explanation. The official story is that she left voluntarily. That grief drove her to disappear. But the investigator knows better, and every anniversary of the crash, he drives as far away from California as he can get, because on that night, without fail, his phone rings. And this year, he thinks he heard something new in the background, a voice, very faint, that sounded exactly like hers. And now, as you sit there, listening to this story, your own phone might buzz. You might see a name you weren't expecting, someone who shouldn't be calling. Would you answer? Would you let it ring? Or would you stare at the screen, paralyzed, heart pounding, until it stops, and wonder if, somewhere out there, someone or something is still waiting for you to pick up? Because the truth is this: some calls never stop, they only wait. And one day, whether you're ready or not, one of them might be for you.